Hello, guys. Are you ready for our continuing reading our book? Hi, sweetheart. How many points I need to pass? Hi, Fox. Can you guys hear the sound from the rain and the fire? Can you? How about now? Okay, good. Is it too loud? Oh, is it too loud? Okay, good. All right. We are reading Throne of Glass. It's one of my boys, oldest boys, fantasy books. He wanted me to read it for you. It is a book by Sarah J. Maas, and we have reached chapter 8, where our assassin, Selena, she has agreed to be the champion for the prince. And they have reached the big city where they are gonna have a big competition where assassins or champions are gonna fight each other. Are you guys ready? Yeah, Fox. Alright, guys. Here we go. Selena walked down a marble hall, her dress flowing behind in a purple and white wave. Kael strode beside her, a hand of the eagle-shaped pommel of his sword. "Is there anything interesting down this hall?" she asked. "What else would you care to see? We've already seen all 3 gardens, the ballrooms, the historical rooms, and the nicest views offered from the stone castle. If you refuse to go into the glass castle, there's nothing else to see," Kael said. She crossed her arms. She managed to convince him to give her a tour under the pretense of extreme boredom. Actually, I think she's scouting the place to see if she can get away. What do you think, guys? When in fact she'd used every moment to plot a dozen escape routes from her room. See? Mama Raiden was on the right track. The castle was old, and most of its halls and stairwells went nowhere. Escaping would require some thoughts. But with the competition beginning tomorrow, what else did she have to do? And what better way to prepare for a potential disaster. You think she's silly? I don't understand why you refuse to enter the glass edition, he went on. There's no difference between the interiors. You wouldn't even know that you were inside it unless someone told you or you looked out the window. Only an idiot would walk in a house made of glass, she said. It's as sturdy as steel and stone, Cale said. Yes, until someone just a bit too heavy enters and it comes crashing down. That's impossible. The thought of standing on floors of glass made her queasy. Is there no menagerie or library that we could see? They passed by a set of closed doors. The sound of lilting speech reached them, along with the gentle strumming of a harp. What's in there? That is the Queen's court. He grabbed her arm and pulled her down the hall. Queen Georgina! Didn't he have any idea what information he was giving away? Perhaps he honestly thought she wasn't a threat. She hid her scowl. Yes, Queen Georgina Haviliard. Is the young prince at home? Holland? He's at school. And is he as handsome as his older brother? Selina smirked as Cale tensed. It was well known that the 10-year-old prince was rotten and spoiled inside out, and she remembered the scandal that had erupted a few months before her capture. Holland Haviliard, upon finding his porridge burnt, had beaten one of his servants so badly that there were no possibility of it being concealed. The woman's family had been paid off, and the young prince shipped to school in the mountains. Of course, everyone knew. Queen Georgina had refused to hold court for a month. That is a rotten, spoiled child. What do you guys think? Holland will grow into his lineage, Cale grumbled. There was a bounce to her step as Selina walked out. Still have no idea what's going on. I know, Fox. But there is actually, if you want to, there is a video of the first 7 chapters, if you want to listen to it, so you can catch up. There was a bounce to her step as Selina walked on, the court fading away behind them. They were silent for a few minutes before an explosion sounded nearby, then another. What is that awful noise? Selina said. The captain led her through a set of glass doors, and he pointed up as they entered into the garden. The clock tower, he said, his bronze eyes shining with amusement as the clock finished its war cry. She'd never heard bells like that. From the garden sprouted a tower made of inky black stone. Well, it was only if you wanted to catch up, sweetie, okay? Two gargoyles, wings spread for flight, perched on each of the 4 clock faces, soundlessly roaring as those beneath. What a horrible thing, she whispered. The numbers were like war paint on the white face of the clock. the hands like swords as they slashed across the pearly surface. As a child, I wouldn't go near it, Kale admitted. You'd see something like this before in the Gates of Weird? Not in a garden? How old is it? The king had it built around Dorian's birth. This king, Kale nodded. Why would he build such a wretched thing? She asked. Come on, he said, turning as he ignored her question. Let's go. Selina examined the clock for a second more. The thick, clawed finger of a gargoyle pointed at her. She could have sworn that its jaws had widened. As she made to follow Kale, she noticed a tile on the paved pathway. What is this? He stopped. What is what? She pointed at the mark engraved on the slate. It was a circle with a vertical line through the middle that extended beyond the circumference. Try again. Circumference. Both ends of the line were hooked, one direction downward, the other up. What is the mark on this path here? He walked around until he stood beside her. I have no idea. Used to write stories myself, but gave up, because couldn't bring myself to read my own text. Aw, Fox. I would be happy to assist you there. Selina examined the gargoyle again. He's pointing at it. What does that symbol mean? It means you're wasting my time, he said. It's probably some sort of decorative sundial. Are there other marks? If you looked, I'm sure you can find them. She allowed herself just give me a sec, guys. Hello, Bambi. Just give me a sec, guys. My boy, he has ordered a watch and it came today. Of course, he is very excited to get it open. Uh-huh. Come on. Open up. Where's school scan? Hey, 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 hey. Hello. På plads. Now where were we? Holy fuck. I got scared there for a second. Bamboo coming in with a sub. Thank you so much, sweetheart. Oh. She allowed herself to be dragged from the garden, away from the shadow of the clock tower, and into the marble halls of the castle. Try as she might, and walk as far as they did, she couldn't shake the feeling that those bulging eyes were still upon her. They continued past the kitchen quarters, which were a mess of shouting, clouds of flour, and surging fires. Once beyond, they entered a long hallway, empty and silent save for their footsteps. Selina suddenly halted. "What," she breathed, "is that?" She pointed at the 20-foot oak doors, her eyes widening at the dragons that grew out of either side of the stone wall. Four-legged dragons, not vicious, bipedal, wyverns like those in the royal seal. The library. Two words were like shot of lightning. The She looked at the claw-shaped iron handles. "Can we? May we go in?" The captain of the guard opened the doors reluctantly, the strong muscles of his back shifting as she pushed hard against the worn oak. Compared to the sunlit hallway, the interior that stretched beyond them seemed formidably dark. But as she stepped inside, candelabras came into view. A long, with black and white marble floors, large mahogany tables with red velvet chairs, a slumbering fire, mezzanines, bridges, ladders, railings, and then books. Books and books and books. She entered a city made entirely of leather and paper. Selina put a hand against her heart. Escape routes be damned. I've never seen. How many volumes are there? Cale shrugged. The last time anyone bothered to count, it was 1,000,000. But that was 200 years ago. I might say more than that, especially given the legend that a second library lies deep beneath in catacombs and tunnels. Over 1,000,000! 1,000,000 books! Her heart leaped and danced, and she cracked a smile. I'd die before I even got through half of that. You like to read? She raised an eyebrow. Don't you? Not waiting for an answer, she moved farther into the library, the train of her gown sweeping across the floor. She neared herself a shelf and looked at the titles. She recognized none of them. Grinning, she whirled and moved through the main floor, running a hand across the dusty books. I didn't know assassins liked to read, Cale called. If she were to die now, it would be a complete bliss. You said you were from the Terrassen. Did you ever visit the great library of Orinth? They say it's twice the size of this, and that it used to hold all the knowledge of the world. She turned from the stack she was currently studying. Yes, she admitted, when I was very young. Though they wouldn't let me explore, the master scholars were too afraid I'd ruin some valuable manuscripts. She hadn't returned to the great library since, and wondered how many of those invaluable works had been ordered destroyed by the King of Ardenland when he outlawed magic. From the way Cale said "used to" with a tinge of sadness, she assumed much had been lost, though part of her savoured the hope that those master scholars had smuggled many of the priceless books to safety. That when the royal family had been slaughtered and the King of Ardenland evaded, those stuffy old men had had the good sense to start hiding 2,000 years' worth of ideas and learning. A dead, empty space opened inside her. Needing to change the subject, she asked, "Why are none of your folk here?" "Guards are no use in a library." Oh, how wrong he was! Libraries were full of ideas, perhaps the most dangerous and powerful of all weapons. She said, "I was referring to your noble companions." He leaned against the table, a hand still on his sword. At least one of them remembered that they were alone together in the library. "Reading is a bit out of fashion, I'm afraid." "Yes, well, more for me to read then." "Read? These belong to the king." "It's a library, isn't it?" "It's the king's property, and you aren't of noble blood. You need permission from either him or the prince." "I highly doubt either would notice the loss of a few books." Cale sighed. "It's late. I'm hungry." "So?" she said. He growled and practically dragged her from the library. After a solitary supper, over which she contemplated all of her planned escape routes and how she might make more weapons for herself, Selina paced through her rooms. Where were the other competitors being kept? Did they have access to books if they wanted? Selina slumped into a chair. She was tired, but the sun had barely set. Instead of reading, she could perhaps use the pianoforte, but, well, it had been a while, and she wasn't sure she could endure the sound of her own stumbling, clumsy playing. She traced her finger over a splotch of fuchsia silk on her dress. All those books with no one to read them. An idea flashed, and she jumped to her feet, only to sit at the desk and grab a piece of parchment. If Captain Westfall insisted on protocol, then she'd give it to him in abundance. She dipped the glass pen in a pot of ink and held it over the paper. How odd it felt to hold a pen. She traced the letters in the air. It was impossible that she'd forgotten how to write. Her fingers moved awkwardly as the pen touched the paper, but she carefully wrote her name, then the alphabet 3 times. The letters were uneven, but she could do it. She pulled out another piece of paper and began to write. "Your Highness, it has come to my attention that your library isn't a library, but rather a personal collection for only you and your esteemed father to enjoy. As many of your million books seem to be present and unused, I must beg you to grant me permission to borrow a few so that they might receive the attention they deserve. Since I am deprived of company and entertainment, this act of kindness is the least someone of your importance could. I can actually not read that. What the heck is it saying? Could sign to bestow upon a lonely, miserable wretch such as I. Yours most truly, Selina Sardothian. Oh, she's actually gonna behave and ask for permission. What? What does that mean? Bambi? It says Quetzalcoatl. What does that mean? Oh my god, she's gonna. Oi! I do behave. Oh my god, she's gonna take part in competition and she's thinking about books. Or she's gonna use library to escape. Ah, okay. And I always behave. Fox, come on. When you're grounded, yes. What? Nuh-uh. Oh, come on, Bambi. You don't mean that. Oh, come on, Bambi. You're serious, Bambi. Come on, Bambi, you're not serious. No, you're true. Fine. Fox, I'm very sorry for my actions yesterday. Thank you, Bambi. There. Now unground me, please. Thank you. You want to listen to book? Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Continue. We'll continue. Selina beamed at her note and handed it to the nicest looking servant she could find, with specific instructions to give it immediately to the Crown Prince. When the woman returned half an hour later with a stack of books piled in her arms, Selina laughed as she swiped the note that crowned the column of leather. Good night, Fox. Sweet dreams. My most true assassin. Enclosed are 7 books from my personal library that I have recently read and enjoyed immensely. You are, of course, free to read as many of the books in the castle library as you wish, but I command you to read these first so that we might discuss them. I promise they are not dull, for I am not one inclined to sit through pages of nonsense and bloated speech, though perhaps you enjoy works and authors who think very highly of themselves. Most affectionately, Dorian Haviliard. Selina laughed again, and took the books from the woman's arms, thanking her for her trouble. She walked into her bedroom, shutting the door with a backward kick, and dropped onto the bed, scattering the books across the crimson surface. She didn't recognize any of the titles, though one author was familiar. Choosing the book that seemed the most interesting, Selina flipped onto her back and began to read. Selina awoke the next morning to the wretched booming of the clock tower. Half asleep, she counted the chimes. Noon. She sat up. Where was Kale? And most importantly, what about the competition? Wasn't it supposed to have started today? She leaped from bed and stalked through her chambers, half expecting to find him sitting in a chair, a hand upon his sword. He wasn't there. She popped her head into the hallway, but the 4 guards only reached for their weapons. She paced onto the balcony, the crossbows of 5 guards beneath clicking into position, and put her hands on her hips as she surveyed the autumn day. The trees in the garden were golden brown, half of the leaves already dead on the earth. Yet the day was so warm it could have passed for summer. Selina took a seat on the rail and waved at the guards with their crossbows aimed at her. Out across Rifthold she could make out the sails of ships, and the wagons and people streaming through the streets. The green roofs of the city glowed emerald in the sun. She looked again at the 5 guards beneath the balcony. They stared right back at her, and when they slowly lowered their crossbows, she grinned. She could knock them senseless with a few heavy books. A sound flitted through the garden, and some of the guards glanced towards the source. 3 women appeared from around a nearby hedge, clustered in conversation. Most of the talk Selina had overheard yesterday was immensely dull, and she didn't expect much of the women neared. As the women neared, sorry. They wore fine dresses, though one in the middle, the raven-haired one, wore the finest. The red skirts was the size of a tent, and her body was tightly bound, that Selina wondered if her waist were any more than 16 inches. The other women were blondes dressed in pale blue, their matching gowns suggesting their rank as ladies in waiting. Selina backed away from the ledge as they stopped at the nearby fountain. From her place at the back of the balcony, Selina could still see, as the woman in the red brushed a hand down the front of her skirts. "I should have worn my white dress," she said loudly enough for everyone in Rifthold to hear. "Dorian likes white." She adjusted a pleat in her skirt. "But I'll wager that everyone's wearing white." "Shall we go, milady?" asked one of the blondes. "No," snapped the woman. "This dress is fine, old and shabby as it is." "But," said the other blonde, then stopped as her mistress' head whipped around. Selina approached the rail again and peered over. The dress hardly looked old. "It would take long for Dorian to ask me for a private audience." Selina now leaned over the edge of the balcony. The guards watched the three girls, rapt for another reason entirely. "Though I worry how much Parrington's courting will interfere. But I do adore the man for inviting me to Rifthold. My mother must be writhing in her grave." She paused and then said, "I wonder who she is." "Your mother, milady?" "The girl the prince brought into Rifthold." "The girl the prince brought into Rifthold. I heard he travelled all to over Irelia to find her, and that she rode into the city on the captain of the guard's horse. I've heard nothing else about her, not even her name." The two women lagged behind their mistress and exchanged exasperated looks that informed the assassin this conversation had been held many times before. "I don't need to worry," the woman mused. "The prince's harlot won't be well received." "His what?" The ladies in waiting stopped beneath the balcony, batting their eyelashes at the guards. "I need my pipe," the woman murmured, rubbing her temples. "I feel a headache coming on. Oh my God, woman." Selina's brows rose. "Regardless," the woman continued, striding away, "I shall have to watch my back. I might have to—" Crash! The women screamed, the guards whirled with their crossbows pointed, and Selina looked skyward as she retreated from the rail and into the shadows of the balcony doorway. The flower pot had missed, this time. The woman cursed so colorfully that Selina clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from laughing. "Oh my God, did she just throw a flower pot down on the women?" The servant cooed, wiping mud from the women's skirts and suede shoes. "Be quiet," the woman hissed. The guards wisely didn't let their amusement show. "Be quiet and let's go." The women hurried off as the princess harlot strode into her chambers and called for her servants to dress her in the finest gown they could find. Oh my God. Actually, that was something I could do as well, just to get amused. Alright, guys, chapter 9. Selina stood before the rosewood mirror, smiling. She ran a hand down her gown. Seafoam white lace bloomed from the sweeping neckline, washing upon her breast from the powder green ocean of silk that made up the dress. A red sash covered the waist, forming an inverted peak that separated the bodice from the explosion of skirts beneath. The English language is very difficult today. Patterns of clear green beads were embroidered in whorls and vines across the whole of it. Bone-colored stitching stretched along the ribs. Tucked inside her bodice was the small makeshift hairpin dagger. Though it poked merciless at her chest, she lifted her hands to touch her curled and pinned hair. She didn't know what she planned to do now that she was dressed, especially if she probably had to change before the competition started. But skirts rustled from the doorway, and Selina raised her eyes in the reflection to see Philippa enter behind her. The assassin tried not to preen and failed miserably. "It's such a pity you are who you are," Philippa said, turning Selina to face her. "I wouldn't be surprised if you managed to ensnare some lord into marriage. Maybe even His Highness, if you were charming enough." She adjusted the green folds of Selina's dress before kneeling down to brush the assassin's ruby-colored slippers. "Well, it seems rumor has already suggested that. I overheard a girl saying that the Crown Prince brought me here to woo me. I thought the entire court knew about this stupid competition." Philippa rose. "Whatever the rumors are, it'll all be forgotten in a week. Just you wait. Let him find a new woman he likes, and you'll vanish from the whispering of the court." Selina straightened as Philippa fixed a stray curl. "Oh, it's not meant as for fuck's sake. It's not meant as an offense, Poppet. Beautiful ladies are always associated with the Crown Prince. You should be flattered that you are attractive enough to be considered his lover." I have a feeling I'm going to be struggling with the English word today completely. I'd rather not be seen that way at all. Better than as an assassin, I'd wager. She looked at Philippa and then laughed. Philippa shook her head. "Your face is much more pretty when you smile. Girlish even. Far better than the frown you always have." "Yes," Selina admitted. "You might be right." She made to sit down upon the mauve ottoman. "Ah," Philippa said, and Selina froze, standing upright. "You'll wrinkle the fabric." "But my feet hurt in these shoes." She frowned pitifully. "You can't intend for me to stand all day, even through my meals?" "Only until someone tells me how lovely you look." "No one knows you're my servant." "Oh, they know. I've been assigned to the lover the prince brought to Rifthold." Yes, typical court intrigues. Selina chewed her lip. Was it a good thing that no one knew who she truly was? What would her competition think? Perhaps a tunic and pants would have been better. Selina reached to move a curl that itched her cheek, and Philippa batted her hand away. You'll ruin your hair." The doors to her apartment slammed open, followed by an already familiar snarling and stomping about. She watched in the mirror as Cale appeared in the doorway, panting. Philippa curtsied. "You," he began, then stopped as Selina faced him. His brows lowered as his eye traveled along her body. His head cocked, and he opened his mouth as if to say something, but only shook his head and scowled. "Upstairs! Now!" "Uh-oh, someone is in trouble." She curtsied, looking up at him beneath lowered lashes. "Where, pray tell, are we going?" "Oh, don't simper at me." He grabbed her by the arm, guiding her out of the room. "Captain Westfall!" Philippa scolded. "She'll trip on her dress. At least let her hold her skirts." She actually... Seriously? Someone talking like that to a captain? Oh my god. She actually did trip on her dress, and her shoes cut into her heels quite terribly. But he would hear none of her objections as he dragged her into the hall. She smiled at the guards outside her door, and her smile burst into a grin at their exchanged approving glances. The captain's the captain's grip tightened until it hurt. "Hurry," he said. "We can't be late." "Perhaps if you'd given me ample warning I'd have dressed earlier and you wouldn't have to drag me." It was hard to breathe, with the corset crushing her ribs. As they hurried up a long staircase, she raised a hand to her hair to ensure that it hadn't fallen out. "My mind was elsewhere. You were fortunate to be dressed, though I wish you'd worn something less frilly to see the king." The king! She was thankful that she yet hadn't eaten. "Yes, the king. Did you think you wouldn't see him? The Crown Prince told you the competition was to start today. This meeting will mark the official beginning. The real work begins tomorrow." Dun 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 dun. Her arms became heavy, and she forgot all about her aching feet and crushed ribs. In the garden, the queer, off-kilter clock tower began chiming the hour. They reached the top of the staircase and rushed down a long hallway. She couldn't breathe. Nauseated, she looked out the window that lined the passage. The earth was far below. Far, far below. They were in the glass addition. She didn't want to be there. She couldn't be in the glass castle. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because he just decided to see you now. He originally said this evening. Hopefully the other champions will be later than us." She felt like fainting. The king. "When you enter," he said over his shoulder, "stop where I stop. Bow low. When you raise your head, keep it high and stand straight. Don't look the king in the eye. Don't answer anything without 'Your Majesty' attached. And do not, under any circumstances, talk back. He'll have you hanged if you don't please him." She had a terrible headache around her left temple. Everything was sticky and frail. They were so high up, so dangerously high. Cale stopped before rounding a corner. "You're pale." She had difficulty focusing on his face as she breathed in and out, in and out. She hated corsets. She hated the king. She hated glass castles. I will be right back, guys. I am back, guys. Sorry about that. My boy came home. Are you guys ready? Ready, Eddie, Eddie, go. She had difficulty focusing on his face as she breathed in and out, in and out. She hated corsets, she hated the king, she hated glass castles. The days surrounding her capture and sentencing had been like a fever dream, but she could perfectly visualize her trial. The dark wood of the walls, the smoothness of the chair beneath her, the way her injuries still ached from the capture, and the terrible silence that had overtaken her body and soul. She had glanced at the king only once. It was enough to make her reckless, to wish for any punishment that would take her far from him, even a quick death. Selina! She blinked, her cheeks burning. Cale's features softened. He's just a man. But a man you should treat with the respect his rank demands. He began walking with her again, slower. This meeting is only to remind you and the other champions of why you're here, and what you're to do, and what you stand to gain. You're not on trial. You will not be tested today. They entered a long hallway, and she spied 4 guards posted before large glass doors at the other end. Selina! He stopped a few feet from the guards. His eyes were rich, molten brown. Yes? Her heartbeat steadied. You look rather pretty today, was all he said, before doors opened and they walked forward. Selina raised her chin as they entered the crowded room. At least there's a man that can give a compliment. She saw the floor first. Red marble, its white veins illuminated in the light of the sun, which slowly vanished as the opaque glass doors groaned shut. Chandeliers and torches hung all around. Her eyes darted from one side of the large, crowded chamber to the next. There were no windows, just a wall of glass, looking into nothing but sky. No escape, save for the door behind her. To her left, a fireplace occupied most of the wall, and as Cale led her farther into the room, Selina tried not to stare at the thing. It was monstrous, shaped like a roaring, fanged mouth, a blazing fire burning within. There was something greenish about the flame, something that made her spine straighten. The captain stopped in the open space before the throne, and Selina halted with him. He didn't seem to notice their ominous surroundings, or if he did, he hid it far better. She pulled her gaze forward, taking in the crowd that filled the room. Stiffy, knowing that many eyes were upon her, Selina dropped into a low bow. Her skirts were whispering. She found her legs weak when Cale put a hand on her back to motion her to rise. He led her from the center of the room, where they took up a spot beside Dorian Haviliard. The absence of dirt and 3 weeks' worth of hard travel had a noticeable effect on his smooth face. He wore a red and gold jacket, his black hair brushed and shining. An expression of surprise crossed his features when he beheld her in her finery, but it quickly melted into a wry grin as he looked towards his father. She might have returned it when she had she not been focusing so much on keeping her hands from shaking. The king spoke at last. Now that you all finally bothered to arrive, perhaps we can begin. It was a voice she had heard before, deep and raspy. It made her bones crack and splinter, made her feel the astonishing cold of a winter long since past. Her eyes only dared to venture as far as his chest. It was broad, not entirely with muscle, seemed tightly restrained within a crimson and black tunic. A cape of white fur hung from his shoulders, and a sword was sheathed at his side. Atop its hilt perched a wyvern open-mouthed and screaming. None that came before that broad blade lived to see another day. She knew that sword. Nothung was its name. You have all been retrieved from across Erilea for the purpose of serving your country. It was easy enough to tell the nobility from her competitors. Old and wrinkled, each nobleman wore fine clothes and decorative swords. Beside each of them stood a man, some tall and slender, some burly, some average, all of them surrounded by at least 3 vigilant guards. 23 men stood between her and freedom. Most of them had enough bulk to warrant a double take, but when she scanned their faces, often scarred, pockmarked, or just plain hideous, there were no spark behind their eyes, no shining kernel of cleverness. They had been picked for muscle, not brain. 3 of them were actually in chains. Were they that dangerous? A few of them met her gaze, and she stared right back, wondering if they thought she was a competitor or just a court lady. Most of the competitors' attention jumped right over her. She gritted her teeth. The dress had been a mistake. Why had Cale not told her about the meeting yesterday? A moderately handsome black-haired young man stared at her, though as she willed her face into neutrality, while his grey eyes took her in. He was tall and lean, but not gangly, and he inclined his head to her. She studied him for a moment longer, from the way he balanced his weight of his left. From the way he balanced his weight to his left, to what features his first noticed when his eyes moved on, and he examined the other competitors. One was a gargantuan man standing beside Duke Parrington, who seemed crafted of muscle and steel, and took pains to display it with his sleeveless armor. Excuse me. The man's arms looked capable of crushing a horse's skull. It wasn't that he was ugly. In fact, his tanned face was rather pleasant. But there was something nasty about his demeanor, about his obsidian eyes as they shifted and met her gown. His large white teeth gleamed. Sorry about that, guys. My boys needed my help. You guys ready? The king spoke. You are each competing for the title of my champion. My right hand sword in world brimming with enemies. A flicker of shame sparked within her. What was champion but dressed up name for murderer? Could she actually stomach working for him? She swallowed. She had to. She had no other choice. Over the next 13 weeks. Oh, sorry. Over the next 13 weeks, you shall each dwell and compete in my home. You will train every day and be tested once a week. A test during which one of you will be eliminated. Selina did the calculations. There were 24 of them, and only 13 weeks. As if sensing her question, the king said, These tests will not be easy, nor will your training. Some of you might die in the process. We will add additional elimination tests as we see fit. And if you fall behind, if you fail, if you displease me, you will be packed off to whatever dark hole you came from. The week after Yule Maas, the 4 remaining champions will face each other in a duel to win the title. Until then, while my court is aware that some sort of contest is being held among my closest friends and advisors, he waved a huge scarred hand to encompass the room. You will keep your business private. Any wrongdoing on your part, and I'll stake you to the front gates. By accident, her gaze slipped into the king's face, and she found his dark eyes staring into hers. The king smirked. Her heart threw itself backward and clung to the bars of her ribcage. Murderer! He should be hanging from the gallows. He had killed many more than she, people undeserving and defenseless. He destroyed cultures, destroyed invaluable knowledge, destroyed so much of what had once been bright and good. His people should revolt. Irilea should revolt, the way those few rebels had dared to do. Selina struggled to maintaining his gaze. She couldn't retreat. "Is that understood?" the king asked, still staring at her. Her head was heavy as she nodded. She had only until Yule Maas to beat them all. One test a week, perhaps more. "Speak!" the king bellowed to the room, and she tried not to flinch. "Are you not grateful for this opportunity? Do you not wish to give me your thanks and allegiance?" She bowed her head and stared at his feet. "Thank you, your majesty. I am most appreciative," she murmured, the sound blending in with the words of the other champions. The king put a hand upon Nothung's hilt. "This should be an interesting 13 weeks." She could feel his attention still upon her, and she grounded her teeth. "Prove trustworthy, become my champion, and wealth and glory will be yours eternal." Only 13 weeks to win her freedom. "I am to depart next week for my own purpose. I will not return until Yulma's, but don't think I won't be able to give the command to execute any of you. Should I hear word of any trouble or accidents, you will be beheaded." The champions nodded once more. "If we're finished, I'm afraid I must take my leave," interrupted Dorian from beside her, and her head snapped up at the sound of his voice, and his impertinence in interrupting his father. He bowed to his father and nodded to the mute councillors. The king waved his son away, not even bothering to look at him. Dorian winked at Chaol before walking from the room. "If there are no questions," the king said to the champions and their sponsors in a tone that suggested that asking questions would only guarantee a trip to the gallows, "then you have my leave. Do not forget that you are here to honor me and my empire. Be gone, all of you." Selina and Chaol didn't speak as they strode down the hallway, quickly moving from the throng of competitors and their sponsors who lingered to speak with one another and size up each other. With every step away from the king, steadying warmth returned. It wasn't until they rounded a corner that Chaol let out a deep breath and removed his hand from her back. "Well, you managed to keep your mouth shut, for once," he said. "But how convincing she was in her nodding and bowing," said a cheerful voice. It was Dorian, leaning against the wall. "What are you doing?" Chaol asked. Dorian pushed off the wall. "Why, waiting for you, of course. We're to dine this evening," Chaol said. "I was speaking to my champion," Dorian said with a roguish wink, remembering how he smiled at the court lady the day of their arrival. She kept her gaze ahead. The crown prince took up a place safely beside Chaol as they walked on. "I apologize for my father's gruffness." She stared down the hall at the servants who bowed to Dorian. He ignored them. By the weird, Dorian laughed. He trained you well already. He nudged Carol with his elbow. From the way you two are blatantly ignoring me, I'd say she could pass for your sister. Though you don't really look like each other, it would be hard to pass off someone so pretty as your sister. Selina was unable to keep a hint of a smile from her lips. Both she and the prince had grown up under strict, unforgiving fathers. Well, father figure in her case. Arobin had never replaced the father she'd lost, nor had he ever tried to. But at least Arobin had an excuse for being equal parts tyrannical and doting. Why had the king of Ardalan let his son become anything but identical copy of himself? There, Dorian said. A reaction. Thank the gods. I've amused her. He glanced behind them, making sure there were no one there, before his voice quieted. I don't think Cale told you our plan before the meeting. Risky on all of our parts. What plan? She traced a finger along the beading on her skirts, watching it shimmer in the afternoon light. For your identity, which you should keep quiet about. Your competitors might know a thing or two about Ardalan's assassin and use it against you. Fair enough, even if it had taken them weeks to bother to fill her in. And who exactly am I to be, if not a ruthless killer? To everyone in this castle, Dorian said, your name is Lillian Gordana. Your mother is dead, and your father is a wealthy merchant from Belhaven. You are the sole heir to his fortune. However, you have a dark secret. You spent your nights as a jewel thief. I met you this summer after you tried to rob me while I was vacationing in Belhaven. And I saw your potential then. But your father discovered your nightly fun and removed you from the lure of the city to a town near Indovier. When my father decided to have this competition, I journeyed to find you and brought you here as my champion. You can fill in the gaps yourself. She raised her brows. Really? A jewel thief? Cale snorted, but Dorian went on. It's rather charming, don't you think? When she didn't respond, the prince asked, do you find my home to your liking? It's very fine indeed, she said dully. Very fine indeed. Maybe I should move my champion to even larger chambers. If it pleases you. Dorian chuckled. I'm glad to find that seeing your competition hasn't damaged the swagger of yours. What you make of Cain? She knew whom he meant. Perhaps you should start feeding me whatever parenting is giving him. When Dorian continued staring at her, she rolled her eyes. Men of his size usually aren't very fast or very nimble. He could knock me out in one punch, probably, but he'd have to be swift enough to catch me. She gave Cale a quick glance, daring him to challenge her claim, but Dorian answered, Good, I thought so. And what of the others? Any potential rivals? Some of the champions have rather gruesome reputation. Everyone else looked pathetic. She lied. The prince's smile grew. I bet they won't expect to be trounced by a beautiful lady. This was all a game to him, wasn't it? Before Selina could ask, someone curtsied in the middle of the path. Your Highness! What a surprise! The voice was high, but smooth and calculated. It was the woman from the garden. She'd changed. She now wore a gown of white and gold that, despite herself, Selina greatly admired. She was unfairly stunning. And Selina was willing to bet a fortune that this was anything but a surprise. The woman had probably been waiting here for a while. Lady Cultain, Dorian said tersely, his body tensening. I've just come from Her Majesty's side, said Cultain, putting her back to Selina. The assassin might have bothered to care about the slight if she had any interest in courtiers. Her Majesty wishes to see your Highness. Of course I informed Her Majesty that your Highness was in a meeting and could not be. Lady Cultain, interrupted Dorian. I'm afraid you haven't been introduced to my friend. Selina would have sworn the young woman bristled. Allow me to present the Lady Lilian Gordana. Lady Lilian, meet Lady Cultain Rompier. Selina curtsies, restraining the urge to keep walking. If she had to deal with too much courtly nonsense, she might be better off back in Dovier. Cultain bowed. The gold streaks in her dress glistened in the sunlight. Lady Lilian is from Belhaven. She arrived just yesterday. The woman studied Selina from beneath dark-shaped eyebrows. And how long will you be staying with us? Only a few years, Dorian said with a sigh. Only? Why? Your Highness, how droll. That is a very long stretch of time. Selina studied Cultain's narrow waist. Was it really that small? Or could she barely breathe in her corset? She caught a glance exchanged between the two men. Exasperation, annoyance, condescension. The Lady Lilian and Captain Westfall are very close companions. Dorian said dramatically. To Selina's delight, Cale blushed. It will feel short for them, I assure you. Oh, the captain blushed, guys. And for you, your Highness, Caltrate said coolly. A concealed edge lingered beneath her voice. Mischief coiled sprang within her, but Dorian answered. I suppose, he drawled, turning those brilliant blue eyes on Selina, that it will be difficult for Lady Lilian and I as well, perhaps more so. Cultain snapped her attention to Selina. Wherever did you find that dress? She purred. It's extraordinary. I had it made for her, Dorian said casually, picking in his nails. The assassin and the prince glanced at each other, their blue eyes reflecting the same intent. At least they had one common enemy. It does look extraordinary on her, doesn't it? Cultain's lip pursed for a moment, then bloomed into a full smile. Simply stunning. Though such pale green tends to wash out women of paled skin. The Lady Lilian's paleness was a source of pride for her father. It makes her rather unusual. Dorian looked to Cale, who failed in his attempt to not appear incredulous. Don't you agree, Captain Westfall? Agree about what? He snapped. How unusual our Lady Lilian is. Shame on you, your Highness, Selina chided, concealing her wicked amusement beneath a giggle. I pale in comparison to Lady Cultain's fine features. Cultain shook her head, but looked at Dorian as she spoke. You are too kind. Oh my God, women. Give me some pair of pants instead, huh? Dorian shifted on his feet. Well, I've dallied enough. I must attend to my mother. He bowed to Caltaine, then to Chaol. Finally, he faced Selina. She watched with raised brows as he lifted her hand to his lips. His mouth was soft and smooth upon her skin, and the kiss sent a red-hot line of fire up through her arm that singed her cheeks. She fought against the urge to step back or smack him. "Until our next meeting, Lady Lillian," he said with a charming smile. She would have highly enjoyed seeing Caltaine's face, but she dipped into a courtesy. "We must be on our way as well," Chaol said, as Dorian strode off, whistling to himself, his hands in his pocket. "May we escort you anywhere?" It was an insincere offer. "No," Caltaine said flatly, the facade falling. "I'm meeting with His Grace, Duke Parrington. I do hope we'll see more of each other, Lady Lillian," she said, watching her with a keenness that would make any assassin proud. "We must be friends, you and I." "Of course," Selina said. Caltaine swept past them, the skirts of her dress floating in the air around her. They resumed walking, waiting until her footsteps had vanished from their ears before speaking. "Enjoyed that, did you?" Chaol growled. "Immensely." Selina patted Chaol's arm as she took it in her own. "Now, you must pretend that you like me, or else everything will be ruined. You and the Crown Prince share the same sense of humor, it seems. Perhaps he and I will become dear friends, and you will be left to rot." "Oh, she is poking the captain, dear." "I wonder if he will be jealous." "Dorian is more inclined to associate with ladies of better breeding and beauty." She whipped her head to look at him. He smiled. "How vain you are." She glared. "I hate women like that. They are so desperate for the attention of men that they are willingly betray and harm members of their own sex. And we claim men cannot think with their brains. At least, men are direct about it. They say that her father is as rich as a king," Chaol said. "I suppose that part of why Parrington is so infatuated. She arrived here in a little bigger than most peasant huts. It was carried here from her home, a distance of almost 200 miles. "You like Crafton? Oh, you're mean, Jay, calling him Crafton." "What debauchery! I pity her servants. I pity her father." They chuckled as he lifted the arm linked with hers a bit higher. She nodded to the guards outside her chambers as they stopped. She faced Chaol. "Are you eating lunch? I'm starved." He glanced at the guards, his smile fading. "I have important work to do, like prepare a company of men for the king to bring with him on his journey." She opened the door, but looked at him. The tiny freckle upon his cheek moved upward as the smile spread once more. "What?" she asked. Something smelled delicious inside her chambers, and her stomach grumbled. Cale shook his head. "Ardalan's assassin," he chuckled, and began walking back down the hall. "You should rest," he called over his shoulder. "The competition actually begins tomorrow, and even if you're fantastic as you claim to be, you're going to need every moment of sleep you can get." Though she rolled her eyes and slammed the door, Selina found herself humming throughout her meal. Dun 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 dun. No, I never called him Captain. I said Captain. Alright, guys. Chapter 11. Selina felt as if she'd barely closed her eyes when a hand jabbed her side. She groaned. I did? I'm sorry about that. She groaned, wincing as the drapes were thrown back to welcome the morning sun. "Wake up!" Not surprisingly, it was Cale. She shimmered beneath the blankets, pulling them over her head, but he grabbed the covers and threw them to the floor. Her nightgown was wrapped around her thighs. Selina shivered. "It's cold," she moaned, holding her knees to her body. She didn't care that she had only a few months to beat the other champions. She needed sleep. It would have been nice if the Crown Prince had considered springing her from Endovia earlier, so she could have some time to regain her strength. How long had he known about this competition anyway? "Get up!" Cale ripped the pillows from beneath her head. "Now you're wasting my time." If he noticed how much skin she was showing, he didn't react. Typical men. Don't let women sleep, huh? Grumbling, Selina slithered to the edge of the bed, dangling a hand over the edge to touch the floor. "Fetch my slippers," she mumbled. "The floor's like ice." He growled, but Selina ignored him as she got to her feet. She staggered and slouched into the dining room, where an enormous breakfast lay on the table. Cale jerked his chin toward the food. "Eat up. The competition starts in an hour." Whatever nerves she felt, she kept them hidden from him, as she gave an exaggerated sigh and collapsed onto her chair with the grace of a large beast. Selina scanned the table. Yet again there were no knives. She stabbed her fork into a piece of sausage. From the doorway, Cale asked, "Why, might I ask, are you so tired?" She gulped down the rest of the pomegranate juice and wiped her mouth on a napkin. "I was up until 4 reading," she said. "I sent a letter to your princeling asking for permission to borrow books from the library. He granted my wish and sent 7 books from his personal library that I am commanded to read." Cale shook his head in disbelief. "It isn't your place to write the Crown Prince." "Well, it depends how. Men don't let women sleep." Uh-huh. She gave him a simpering smile and took a bite of ham. He could have ignored the letter, and besides, I'm his champion. Not everyone feels obligated to be as nasty to me as you do. You're an assassin. If I say I'm a jewel thief, will you treat me with more courtesy? She waved a hand. Don't answer that. She spooned porridge into her mouth, found it to be bland, and scooped 4 heaping mounds of brown sugar into the gray mass. 4 spoonfuls of sugar. Oh my god. Would the competitors actually be worthy opponents? Before she would start worrying, she examined his black clothes. Don't you ever wear normal clothing? Hurry up, was all he said. The competition awaited. Suddenly not hungry, she pushed away her bowl of porridge. I should get dressed then. She turned her head to call for Philippa, but paused. Just what sort of activities might I expect at the tournament today, so I can dress accordingly, of course? I don't know. They don't give us the details until you arrive. The captain rose and drummed the pommel of his sword before calling to a servant as Selina walked to her bedroom. Behind her, Cale spoke to the servant girl. Dress her in pants and a shirt, something loose. Nothing frilly or revealing, and bring a cloak. The girl disappeared into the dressing room. Selina followed after her, unceremoniously stripping down to her underclothes and enjoying it far too much when Cale's cheeks reddened before he turned away. Wow, he was actually lurking. Men. A few minutes later, Selina frowned at herself as she hurried after the captain into the foyer. I look ridiculous. These pants are absurd, and this shirt is awful. Stop whining. No one gives a damn about your clothes. He flung open the door to the hall. The guards outside instantly at attention. Besides, you can take them off at the barracks. I'm sure everyone would be thrilled to see you in your undergarments. She swore violently under her breath, pulling her green velvet cloak tight around herself, and trailed after him. I would have sworn as well. I would have given him all the swear words I've known there. The captain of the guard rushed through the castle, still freezing with the early morning chill, and they soon entered the barracks. Guards in various states of armor saluted them. An open doorway revealed a large mess hall, where many of the guards were just sitting down to breakfast. Finally, Cale stopped somewhere on the ground floor. The giant rectangular room they entered was the size of the grand ballroom, lined with pillars that supported a mezzanine. The floor was checkered, black and white tile, and the floor to ceiling glass doors that made up one entire wall were open. The the gossamer, I like that word, gossamer. We have a set of that in ESO. The gossamer curtains blowing in the chilly breeze that drifted in from the garden. Most of the 23 other champions were already scattered throughout the room, sparring with what only could be their sponsors' trainers. Everyone was carefully monitored by guards. None bothered to look at her, save for the slightly handsome young man with the grey eyes, who gave her a half smile before returning to firing arrows at a target across the room. With unnerving accuracy, she lifted her chin and surveyed a rack of weapons. You expect me to use a mace an hour after sunrise? 6 guards appeared in the doorway behind them, joining the dozens already in the chamber, swords at the ready. If you attempt anything foolish, Kale said, they'll be here. I'm just a jewel thief, remember? She approached the rack. Foolish, foolish decision to leave all those weapons out. Swords, sword breakers, axes, bows, pikes, hunting daggers, maces, spears, throwing knives, wooden staves. While she generally preferred the stealth of dagger, she was familiar with every weapon here. She glanced around the sparring room and hid her grimace. So were most of the competitors, it seemed. As she inspected them, she caught a movement in the corner of her vision. Kane entered the hall, flanked by 2 guards and a scarred, burly man who must have been his trainer. She squared her shoulders as Kane strode straight toward her, his thick lip parting in a grin. "Good morning," he said, his voice raspy and deep. His dark eyes snaked along her body, then found her face again. "I would have thought you'd been running home by now." She gave him a close-lipped smile. "The fun's just starting, isn't it?" Kane returned her smile and stalked off. It would have been so easy to whirl and grab him by the neck and slam his face into the ground. She didn't even realize she was trembling with rage until Kale stepped into her line of vision. "Save it for the competition," he said softly, but not weakly. "I'm going to kill him," she breathed. "No, you're not. If you want to shut him, then beat him. He's just a brute from the king's army. Don't waste your strength on hating him." She rolled her eyes. "Thank you so much for interfering on my behalf." "You don't need me to rescue you." "It still would have been nice." "You can fight your own battles." He pointed with his sword to the weapon rack. "Pick one." His eyes shone with a challenge as she untied her cloak and tossed it behind her. "Let's see if you actually back up your swaggering." She'd shut Kane up in an unmarked grave for all eternity, but for now, she'd make Kale eat his words. Oh my god, is he gonna be her trainer? Wow. All the weapons were finely made and glistened in the sunlight. Selina eliminated her option one by one, seeing each weapon for what sort of damage she might do to the captain's face. Her heart beat rapidly as she ran a finger across the blade and handles of each. She found herself torn between the hunting daggers and a lovely rapier with a ornate bell guard. She could cut out his heart from a safe distance with that. The sword whined as she drew it from the stand and held it in her hands. It was a good blade, strong, smooth, light. They wouldn't let her have a butter knife on her table, but they gave her access to this? Why not wear him down a bit? Kale tossed his cape on top of hers, his toned body flexing through the dark threads of his shirt. He drew his sword. "On your guard!" He moved into defensive position, and Selina looked at him dully. "Who do you think you are? What sort of person says, 'On your guard'?" "Aren't you first going to show me the basics?" she said quietly enough for only him to hear, his sword dangling from one hand. She rubbed her hilt, her fingers contracting on the cool surface. "I was in Deauville for a year, you realize? I could easily have forgotten." "From the amount of killing that went on in your section of the mines, I highly doubt you've forgotten a thing." "That was with a pickaxe," she said, her smile growing feral. "All I had to do was to crack a man's head open or hurl the axe into his stomach." Thankfully, none of the other champions paid them any heed. "If you consider that sort of gracelessness equal to swordsmanship, what sort of fighting do you do, Captain Westfall?" She put a spare hand over her heart and closed her eyes for emphasis. With a growl, the captain of the guard lunged. But she had been waiting for some time now, and her eyes flew open as soon as his boot scraped against the ground. With a turn of her arm, she brought the sword into blocking position, her legs bracing for the impact as the steel struck. The noise was strange, somehow more painful than receiving the blow. But Selina thought little of it when he charged again and she met his weapon, powering with his eyes. Her arms ached as they were shaken from their slumber, but she continued to deflect and parry. Swordplay was like dancing. Certain steps must be followed, or else it will fall apart. Once she heard the beat, it all came rushing back. The other competitors faded away into shadows and sunlight. "Good," he said through his teeth, blocking her thrust as she forced him to take a defensive stance. Her thighs burned. "Very good," he breathed. He was pretty good himself, better than good, actually. Not that she would tell him that. "Yeah, he is good." With a clang, the two swords met, and they pressed each other's blades. He was stronger, and she grunted at the force required to hold her sword against his. But strong as he might be, he was not as quick. She withdrew and feinted, her feet jabbing and flexing on the floor with bird-like grace. Caught off guard, he had only had time to deflect, his parry lost in his size. She surged forward, her arm coming down again and again, twisting and turning, loving the smooth ache within her shoulder as the blade slammed against his. She was moving fast, fast like a dancer in a temple ritual, fast like a snake in the red desert, fast like water down the side of a mountain. Oh, very poetic here. He kept up, and she allowed him to advance before reclaiming the position. He tried to catch her unaware with a blow to the face, but her anger awoke as her elbow snapped up and deflected, slamming into his fist and forcing it down. Oh, give me a sec, guys. I have a boy crying. Be right, be right back. Guys, sorry about that. It's good that I have to start school soon. Oh my god. Mm. He kept up, and she allowed him to advance before reclaiming the position. He tried to catch her unawares with a blow to the face, but her anger awoke as her elbow snapped up and deflected, slamming into his fist and forcing it down. Something to remember when fighting me, Sadothian, he panted. The sun caught in his golden brown eyes. Hmm? She grunted, lunging to deflect his newest attack. I don't lose. He grinned at her, and before she could comprehend the words, something cut into her feet and she had the sickening feeling of falling. She gasped as her spine collided with marble, the rapier flying from her hand. Kale pointed his blade at her heart. I win, he panted. She pushed herself onto her elbows. You had to resort to tripping me. That's hardly winning at all. I am not the one with the sword at my heart. The sound of clashing weapons and labored breathing filled the air. She flicked her eyes to the other champions, who were all in the middle of sparring. All, of course, except Cain. He grinned broadly at her, and Selina bared her teeth. You have the skills, Kale said, but some of your moves are still undisciplined. She broke her stare with Cain and glared up into Kale's face. That's never stopped me from killing before, she spat. Kale chuckled at her agitation and pointed his sword at the rack, allowing her to get to her feet. Pick another, something different. Make it interesting too. Something that will make me sweat, please. Oh, he's taunting her. He's taunting her. You'll be sweating when I skin you alive and squish your eyeballs beneath my feet, she muttered, picking up the rapier. That's the spirit. She practically threw the rapier into place and drew the hunting knives without hesitation. My dear old friends. A wicked smile spread across her face. Not that cool assassin. You could make him sweat. Yeah, I bet you could. Chapter 12, guys. Just as Selina was about to launch herself and her knives at the captain, someone stomped a spear on the ground and called the room to attention. She faced the voice and found a stocky, balding man standing beneath the mezzanine. "Your attention, now!" the man repeated. Selina looked to Kaol, who nodded. Uh, Selina looked to Kaol, who nodded, taking the knives from her as they joined the 23 other competitors encircling the man. "I'm Theodas Brullo, weapons master and judge of this competition. Of course, our king's the final judge of your sorry lot, but I'll be the one determining every day if you are fit to be his champion." He patted his sword hilt, and Selina had to admire the beautiful woven gold of the pommel. "I've been weapon master here for 30 years, and lived in this castle for 25 more than that. I've trained many a lord and knight, and many a would-be champion of Otterland. It will be very hard to impress me." I'm sorry, guys. My boys are fighting. Give me a sec. I'm so sorry about that, guys. Thank God the school is starting Monday. 8 weeks of vacation for boys in that age. Oh my God. Yeah, boys, but still. Oops, sorry. Where was I? Oh yeah. It would be very hard to impress me. Yeah, I know, but still. Beside Selina, Kale stood with his shoulders thrown back. It occurred to her that Brullo might have trained the captain. Given how easily he had kept up with her, if Brollo had trained him, then the weapon master must live up to his title. She knew better than anyone not to underestimate opponents based on their appearance. The king's already told you all there is about this competition, Brollo said, holding his hand behind his back. But I figured you lot are itching to know more about each other. He pointed a stubby finger at Kane. You, what's your name, occupation, and where do you hail from? And be honest about it. I know none of you are bakers and candlestick makers. Oh my god, he's gonna make a meet and greet thing. Kane's insufferable grin returned. Kane, soldier in the king's army. I hail from the White Fang Mountains. Of course he did. She'd heard tales of the brutality of the mountain folk from that region, and seen a few of them up close, seen the fierceness in their eyes. Many of them had rebelled against Ardalan, and most wound up dead. What would his fellow mountain dwellers say if they could see him now? She gritted her teeth. What would the people of Terrassen say if they would see her now? Brollo, however, either didn't know or didn't care, or didn't even give a nod before he pointed to the man to Kane's right. Selina immediately disliked him. And you? A slender tall man with the thinning blonde hair surveyed the circle and sneered. Xavier Forul, Master Thief of Melisande. Master Thief? That man? Of course, she realized his reed thinness probably aided in slipping into houses. Maybe it wasn't a bluff. One by one, the 21 other competitors introduced themselves. There were 6 more seasoned soldiers, all of them thrown out of the army for questionable behavior, which must have been truly questionable, given that Ardalan's army was notorious for ruthlessness. Then there were the 3 other thieves, including the dark-haired, grey-eyed Nox Oven, whom she actually heard of in passing, and who had been giving her such charming smiles all morning. The 3 mercenaries looked ready to boil someone alive, and then there were the 2 shackle murderers. As his name suggested, Bill Chastain, the Eye-Eater, ate the eyes of his victims. Ew! He looked surprisingly plain, with mousy brown hair, tanned skin, and average height, though Selina had trouble not staring at his scar-flecked mouth. The other murderer was Ned Clement, who had gone for 3 years under the name Scythe for the weapon he used to torture and hack apart temple priestesses. It was a wonder they hadn't executed either man, though from their tanned skin she guessed they spent the years since their captures toiling under the sun in Kalakula, the southern sister labor camp in Endovier. Next came 2 scarred, silent men who seemed to be cronies of some far-off warlord, and then the 5 assassins. She immediately forgot the names of the first 4, a gangly, haughty boy, a hulking brute, a disdainful runt of a man, and a snivelling, hawk-nosed prat who claimed he had an affinity for knives. They weren't even in the Assassin's Guild. Not the Arobenheim, not that Aroben Hamel would ever allow them in. Membership required years of training and a more than impressive track record. While these four might be skilled, they lacked the refinement that Arobin favored in his followers. She'd have to keep an eye on them, but at least they weren't the silent assassin from the windswept dunes of the Red Desert. Those would be worthy of her. They make her sweat a bit. She'd spent a month training with them one burning summer, and her muscles still ached at the memory of their grueling exercises. The last assassin, who called himself Grave, made her pause. He was slight and short, with the kind of wicked face that made people quickly look away. He'd entered the room wearing shackles, and only had them removed when his guards, all 5 of them, gave him a stern warning. Even now they stood nearby, watching him relentlessly. As he introduced himself, Grave flashed an oily smile, revealing his brown teeth. Her disgust didn't improve when Grave ran an eye over her body, and an assassin like that never stopped at just killing. Not if his victim was female. She willed himself to hold his hungry gaze. "And you," Brullo said, cutting into her thoughts. "Lillian Gordana," she said, holding her chin high, "jewel thief from Belhaven." Some of the men sniggered, and she clenched her teeth. They would stop their laughing if they knew her true name, if they knew that this jewel thief could skin them alive without a knife. "Fine," Brullo said, waving a hand. "You all have 5 minutes to put away your weapons and catch your breath. Then we're on mandatory run to see how fit you are. Those of you who can't run the distance, go home, or back to wherever prison your sponsors found you rotting in. Your first test is in 5 days. Consider us merciful, if not sooner." With that, everyone scattered, the champions murmuring to their trainers about whatever competitor they deemed the biggest threat. Kane or Grave, most likely. Certainly not a jewel thief from Belhaven. Kael remained beside her, watching the champion stride off. She hadn't spent 8 years building a reputation and years laboring in Endovier to be disregarded like this. "If I have to call myself a jewel thief again—" Kael raised his brows. "You'll do what, exactly?" Had it been me, I would have said, "Uh-oh," to that. "Do you know how insulting it is to pretend to be some nobody thief from a small city in Fenharrow?" He stared her down, quiet for a moment. "Are you that arrogant?" She bristled, but he went on. "It was foolish to spar with you just now. I'll admit that I hadn't realized that you'd be that good." Thankfully, no one noticed. "And do you know? Oh, and do you want to know why, Lillian?" He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "Because you're some pretty little girl. Because you're nobody jewel thief from a small city in Fenharrow. Look around." He half turned to the other champions. Is anyone staring at you? Are any of them sizing you up? No, because you're not real competition. Because you don't stand between them and whatever freedom or wealth they're looking for. Exactly. It's insulting. It's smart. That's what it is. And you're going to keep a low profile throughout this entire competition. You're not going to excel, and you're not going to trounce those thieves and soldiers and unknown assassins. You're going to stay solidly in the middle, where no one will look your way, because you're not a threat, because they'll think that you'll be eliminated sooner or later, and they should focus their attention on getting rid of bigger, stronger, faster champions like Kane. But you're going to outlast them, Kale continued. And when they wake up on the morning of the final duel and find that you are their opponent, and that you have beaten them, the look on their faces will make all of the insults and lack of attention worthwhile. He extended his hand to lead her outside. So, what do you have to say about that, Lillian Gordana? I can look out for myself, she said lightly, taking his hand. But I have to say that you're rather brilliant, Captain. So brilliant, actually, that I might give you one of the jewels I plan to steal from the Queen tonight. Kale chuckled, and they strode outside to where the running contest awaited. Her lungs burned and her legs were leadened, but she kept running, kept her position in the middle of the pack of champions. Brollo, Kale, and the other trainers, along with the 3 dozen armed guards, followed them around the game park on horseback. Some of the champions, Grave, Ned, and Bill included, had been giving long manacles. She supposed it was a privilege that Kale hadn't locked her up too. But to her surprise, Kane led the pack, and was nearly 10 yards in front of the rest of them. How could he possibly be that fast? The sound of crunching leaves and laboring breathing filled the warm autumn air, and Selina kept her gaze on the damp and gleaming dark hair of the thief in front of her. One step after another, one breath in, one breath out. Breathe, she had to remember to keep breathing. Ahead, Kane turned a corner, heading north, back toward the castle. Like a flock of birds, they followed him, one step after another, never slowing down. Let them all watch Kane. Let them plot against him. She didn't need to win the race to prove she was better. She was better without any kind of validation that the king would give her. She missed a breath, and her knees wobbled, but she kept upright. The run would be over soon. Soon. She hadn't even dared to look behind her to see if any had fallen. She could feel Kale's eyes on her, though, reminding her to keep in the middle. At least he had that much faith in her. The trees parted, revealed the field that lay between the game park and the stables. The end of the path, her head spun, and she would have cursed at the stitch that lanced through her side had she had any breath to do so. She had to stay in the middle, stay in the middle. Kane cleared the trees and raised his arm above his head in victory. He ran a few more feet, slowing his pace to cool down, and his trainer cheered for him. Selina's only response was to keep her feet moving. Only a few yards left. The light of the open field grew brighter and brighter as it approached. Stars flashed before her eyes, swarming in her vision. She had to stay in the middle. Years of training with Arabin Hamel had taught her the dangers of giving up too easily. Then she was through the trees, and the open field surrounded her in an explosion of space and grass of blue sky. The men in front of her slowed to a stop. Yes, she is like a perky teenager. It was all she could do to keep from sinking to her knees. But she made her legs slow, 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 made her feet walk, made herself take breath after breath, as the stars continued bursting before her eyes. Good, Brodo said, reining his horse and surveying whoever had first returned. Get water? We got more training after this. Through the spots in her vision, she saw Carol stop his horse. Her feet moved of their own accord toward him, then passed back to the woods. Where are you going? I dropped my ring back there, she lied, doing her best to look scatterbrained. Just give me a moment to find it. Without waiting for his approval, she entered the trees to the sneers and sniggers of the champions who have overheard. From the approaching crashing noises, she knew another champion was on his way out. She stepped into the cover of the bushes, stumbling as the world became dark and light until did. She had barely sunk to her knees when she vomited. She heaved and heaved until she had nothing left inside. The straggling champion passed by. On trembling limbs, she grappled onto a nearby tree and hauled herself upright again. She found Captain Westfall standing across the path, watching her with pursed lips. She wiped her mouth on the back of her wrist and said nothing to him as she exited the woods. Well, she hasn't been doing any exercises really for a year. And then all of a sudden have to run, run, run. I can understand why she's vomiting. Yes, but that is not the same as running, my dear. Chapter 13. It was lunchtime when Rollo released them for the day, and to say that Selina was hungry would be a severe understatement. She was halfway through her meal. She was halfway through her meal, shoveling meat and bread down her throat, when the dining room door opened. "What are you doing here?" she said through a mouthful. "What?" said the captain of the guard, taking a seat at the table. He had changed his clothes and taken a bath. He pulled a platter of salmon toward him and piled it on his plate. Selina made a disgusted face, her nose crinkling. You don't care for salmon? I hate fish. I'd rather die than eat it. Oh, she's my kind of girl there. That's surprising, he said, taking a bite. Why? Because you smell like one. She opened her mouth to expose a bowl of bread and beef that she's been chewing. He shook his head. You might fight well, but your manners are a disgrace. She waited for him to mention her earlier vomiting, but he didn't continue. I can act and talk like a lady, if it pleases me. Then I suggest that you begin to do so. After a pause, he asked, how are you enjoying your temporary freedom? Is that a snide remark or an honest question? He took a bite of fish, whichever you like. The window revealed afternoon sky, slightly pale, but still lovely. I'm enjoying it for the most part, especially now that I have books to read. Whenever you lock me in here, I don't suppose you'd understand. On the contrary, I might not have much time to read, as you and Dorian do. But that doesn't mean I love books any less. She bit into an apple. It was tart, with a sweet, honey-like aftertaste. Oh? And what books do you love? He named a few, and she blinked. Well, those are good choices, for the most part. What others? She asked, and somehow an hour flew by, carrying them on the wings of conversation. Suddenly, the clock chimed 1, and he rose. The afternoon is yours to spend in any way you like. Where are you going? To rest my limbs and lungs. Yes, well, hopefully you read something of quality before I see you again. He sniffed the air as he walked out of her room. Hopefully you'll take a bath before I see you again. Sighing, Selina called to a servant to draw her bath. An afternoon of reading on the balcony beckoned. The following dawn, Selina's bedroom door opened, and a familiar stocking gait echoed through the room. K.L. Westfall stopped short when he found the assassin dangling from the beam of the bedroom doorway. Repeatedly hoisting herself up to touch her chin to the wooden bar, sweat soaked her undershirt and ran in rivulets down her pale skin. Oh, she's doing exercises. She's been exercising for an hour already, her arms quivering as she lifted herself again. Though she might pretend to be in the middle of the pack, there was no reason to train like it, even if every repetition made her body scream for her to stop. She wasn't that out of shape. After all, her pickaxe in the mine had been heavy, and it definitely had nothing to do with her fellow competitors walloping her at the race yesterday. She already had an edge on them. She just needed it to be a bit sharper. She didn't pause her exercising as she smiled at him, panting through her clenching teeth. To her surprise, he smiled back. By that afternoon, a vicious rainstorm arrived, and Kael permitted Selina to walk around the castle with him after she finished training with the other champions for the day. Though he spoke little, she was glad to be out of her rooms and dressed in one of her new gowns, a lovely lilac silk dress with pale pink lace, accents, and pearl beading. But then they rounded a corner and nearly collided with Carltain Rompier. The assassin would have grimaced, but she forgot all about Carltain as her eyes fell up upon her companion. It was an Elway woman. She was stunning, long and lean, each of her features perfectly formed and smooth. Her loose white dress contrasted with her creamy brown skin, and a three-plated gold torque covered much of her chest and neck. Bracelets of ivory and gold glimmered around her wrists, and her feet were sandaled beneath matching anklets. A thin circlet, comprising dangling gold and jewels, crowned her head. She had 2 male guards with her, armed to the teeth, with an assortment of curved Elway daggers and swords, both of them studying Kael and Selina closely, weighing the threat. The Elway girl was a princess. Yes, she sounds very beautiful, I must say. I'm a jeans girl myself, but the dresses sounds lovely, I must say. Captain Westfall, Carltain said, and curtsied. Beside her, a short man dressed in the red and black garb of a councilman bowed to the pair. The Elway princess stood perfectly still, her brown eyes wary as she took in Selina and her companion. Selina offered her a slight smile, and the princess stepped closer, her guards tensing slightly. She moved with an easy grace. Carltain gestured the girl, poorly hidden distaste written across her beautiful face. This is Her Royal Highness the Princess Nehemia, Idgar of Elway. Kael bowed low. The princess nodded, barely a dip of her chin. Selina knew the name. She had often heard the Elway slaves in Endovier boast of Nehemia's beauty and bravery. Nehemia, the light of Elway, who would save them from their plight. Nehemia, who might someday pose as a threat to the King of Ardalan's rule over her home country when she ascended to the throne. Nehemia, they whispered, who smuggled information and supplies to the rebel groups hiding in Elway. But what was she doing here? And the Lady Lillian, Carltain added briskly. Selina dropped into the lowest curtsy she could give without falling and said in Elway, "Welcome to Rifthole, Your Highness." Princess Nehemia smiled slowly, and the others gaped. The councilman beamed, wiping the sweat from his brows. Why hadn't they sent Nehemia with the Crown Prince or even Parrington? Why was the princess herded around by Carltain Rompier? "Thank you," the princess replied, her voice low. "I imagine you have had a long journey." Selina continued in Elway. "Have you arrived today, Your Highness?" Nehemia's guards exchanged glances, and Nehemia's brows rose slightly. Not too many northerners spoke their language. Yes, and the queen sent this one. Nehemia jerked her head at Caltaine to bring me around with what sweating worm of a man as well. The princess narrowed her eyes at the small councilman, who wrung his hands and dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief. Perhaps he knew what sort of threat Nehemia posed, but why bring her to the castle? Selina rang her tongue across her teeth, trying not to laugh. He seemed a bit nervous. She had to change the subject, or else she'd indeed laugh. What do you make of the castle? It's the most foolish thing I've ever seen, Nehemia said, scanning the ceiling as if she could see through the stone and into the glass section. I'd sooner enter a castle made of sand. Cale watched them somewhat disbelievingly. I'm afraid I haven't understood a word you've said, Caltaine interrupted. Selina tried not to roll her eyes. She'd forgotten the woman was there. We, the princess said, struggling for the word in the common language, were talking with the weather. About the weather, Caltaine corrected sharply. Watch your mouth, Selina snapped before she could think. Caltaine gave Selina a vicious little smile. If she's here to learn our ways, I should correct her so she doesn't sound foolish. Here to learn her ways. Sorry, here to learn their ways or for something else entirely. The faces of the princess and her guards were unreadable. Your Highness, Cale said, stepping forward, a supple movement to keep himself between Nehemia and Selina. Are you having a tour of the castle? Nehemia chewed on the words and then looked to Selina, brows high, as if she expected a translation by now. A smile tugged on the corners of Selina's lips. No wonder the councilman was sweating so profusely. Nehemia was a force to be reckoned with. Selina translated Cale's question with ease. If you consider this structure of madness to be a castle, Nehemia replied. Selina turned to Cale. She says yes. I never knew so many words to mean one. Caltaine sat with folk sweetness. Selina's nails dug into her palms. I'm going to rip your hair out. Cale took another step towards Nehemia, effectively blocking Selina's path to Caltaine. Smart man. He put a hand on his chest. Your Highness, I'm the captain of the Royal Guard. Please allow me to escort you. Just a second, guys. My boy is here. Selina translated again, and the princess nodded. Get rid of her, she said flatly to Selina, and then waved a hand toward Keltane. I don't care for her temperament. You are dismissed, Selina said to Keltane, flashing a bright smile. The princess tires of your company. Keltane started, but the queen, if that is her highness' wish, then it will be granted. Oh, sorry. If that is her highness' wish, then it will be granted, Kale interrupted. Through his features was a mask of protocol. She could have sworn she glimpsed a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Selina wanted to hug him. She didn't bother to nod her farewell to Kaltane, as the princess and the councilman joined them and strode down the hall, leaving the fuming lady behind. Are all of your royal women like that? The princess said to Selina in Elway. Like Kaltane? Unfortunately, your highness. Nehemia examined the assassin, and Selina knew she was taking in her clothes, her gait, her posture, everything Selina herself had observed about the princess already. But you're not like them. How do you know how to speak Ailway so well? I, Selina thought of a lie, studied it for several years. You use the intonation of the peasants. Is that taught in your books? I knew an Elway woman who taught it to me, Selina said. A slave of yours? Her tone sharpened, and Cale flicked his eyes toward them. No, Selina said hurriedly. I don't believe in keeping slaves. Something twisted in her gut at the thought of all those slaves she'd left behind in Endovier. All those people doomed to suffer until they died. Just because she left Endovier didn't mean Endovier has ceased to be. Nehemia's voice was soft. Then you are very unlike your court companions. Selina could only manage a nod to the princess as they turned their attention to the hall ahead. Servants darted past, eyes wide, when they held the princess and her guards. After a moment's silence, Selina squared her shoulders. Why are you in Rifthold, if I might ask? She added, Your Highness. You don't need to bother calling me that. The princess toyed with one of the gold bangles around her wrist. I came at the request of my father, the King of Ilway. Skal du dele med Mark? To learn your language and customs so I might better serve Ilway and my people. Given what she heard of Nehemia, Selina didn't think that was the entirety of it, but she smiled politely as she said, How long will you remain in Rifthold? Until my father sends for me again. She stopped playing with her bracelet as she frowned at the rain pounding the windows. If I'm fortunate, I will only be here until spring, unless my father decides that a man from Ardenland might make me a good consort, and then I'll be here until that matter is settled. Seeing the annoyance in the princess' eyes, Selina felt a shred of pity for whatever man her father chose. A thought struck with her, and Selina tilted her head to the side. Whom would you marry, Prince Dorian? It was prying and a bit impertinent, and she regretted the question the second it came out. But Nehemia just clicked her tongue. That pretty boy? He grinned at me far too much, and you should only see how he winked at the other women in the court. I want a husband to warm my bed, and my bed alone. She glanced sidelong at the assassin, giving her another head-to-toe examination. Selina caught the princess' eyes lingering on the few scars on her hand. Where are you from, Lillian? Selina casually hid her hands in the fold of her gown. Belhaven, a city in Fen Harrow. It's a fishing port. Smells terrible. That wasn't a lie. Every time she visited Belhaven for a mission, the wreck of fish made her gag if she got too near the docks. She is definitely my kind of woman. I hate fish. Oh my god, I hate fish. The princess chuckled. Rift Hole smells terrible. Too many people, at least in Banjali. The sun burns up everything, and my father's river palace smells like lotus blossoms. Kale cleared his throat beside them, obviously tired of being excluded from the conversation, and Selina grinned at him. Don't be so glum, she said in the common tongue. We must cater to the princess. Stop your gloating, he said, his brows low. He put a hand on the hilt of his sword, and Nehemia's guard stepped closer to him. Though Kale might be the captain of the guard, Selina didn't doubt for a moment that Nehemia's guards would put him down if he became a threat. We are only bringing her back to the king's council. I'm going to have a word with them about allowing Caltaine to show her around. Do you hunt? Nehemia interrupted in Elway. Me? The princess nodded. Oh, no, Selina said, then switched back to Elway. I'm more of a reader. Nehemia looked toward a rain-splattered window. Most of our books were burned 5 years ago, when Ardalan marched in. It didn't make a difference if the book were about magic. Her voice quieted at the word, even though Kale and the councilman couldn't understand them. Or history. They just burned the libraries whole, along with the museums and the universities. I don't like this King Ardalan. A familiar ache filled her chest. Selina nodded. Aylway wasn't the only country where that happened. Something cold and bitter glittered in Nehemia's eyes. Now, most of the books we receive are from Ardalan, books in a language I can barely understand. That's also what I must learn while I'm here. There are so many things. She stomped her foot, her jewelry clinking, and I hate these shoes. And this miserable dress. I don't care if it's Aylway silk and I'm supposed to be representing my kingdom. The materials have been itching me ever since I put it on. She stared at Selina's elaborate gown. How can you stand wearing that enormous thing? Selina picked at the skirts of her dress. It breaks my ribs, to be honest. Well, at least I'm not the only one suffering, Nehemia said. Kale stopped before a door and informed the 6 sentries posted outside to watch the women and the princess guards. What's he doing?
returning you to the council and ensuring that Caltaine doesn't lead you around again. Nehemia's shoulders slumped slightly. I've only been here for a day, and I wish to leave. She let out a long sigh through her nose and again turned to the window, as if she could see all the way back to Ailway. Suddenly, she grabbed Selina's hand and squeezed it. Her fingers were surprisingly calloused, in all the spots where the hilt of a sword and a dagger might rest. Selina's eyes met with those of the princess, and she dropped her hand. Perhaps the rumors were correct about her association with the rebels in Elway. Will you keep me company while I'm here, Lady Lillian? Selina blinked at the request, feeling, despite herself, honored. Of course, when I'm available, I'll gladly attend you. I have attendants. I wish for someone to talk to. Selina couldn't help it. She beamed. Kale entered the hallway once more and bowed to the princess. The council would like to see you, he asked. Or, no, he said. Selina translated. Nehemia let out a low groan, but thanked Kale for returning to Selina. I'm glad we met, Lady Lillian, Nehemia said, her eyes bright. Peace be with you. And with you, the assassin murmured, watching her leave. She never had many friends, and the ones she had often disappointed her, sometimes with devastating consequences, as she learned that summer with the silent assassins of the Red Desert. After that, she swore never to trust girls again, especially girls with agendas and power of their own. Girls who would do anything to get what they wanted. But as the door closed behind the ivory train of the Elway princess, Selina wondered if she'd been wrong. Catch the boat? Huh? Wait, who did that? I only banned. Does it automatically get it deleted then? Thanks, Jay. Yeah, but I only banned it. I didn't delete the message, so that's why I was asking. Yeah, maybe. All right, let's finish the last few pages to chapter 14 and then call it for a day. K.R. Westfall watched the assassin eat lunch, her eyes darting from one plate to the next. She had immediately stripped from her gown upon entering her rooms, and now sat in a rose and jade dressing room robe that suited her well. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, her mouthful full of food. But she never stopped eating. She ate more than anyone he knew, including his guards. She had multiple helping of every course of each meal. Enthralled by the Princess Nehemia, the words were barely distinguishable from her chewing. That headstrong girl? He immediately regretted the remark as her eyes narrowed. A lecture was coming on, and he was in no mood to be patronized. He had more important things on his mind before departing his morning. The king hadn't any of the guards he suggested. My brother is coming. Give me a sec. I'm back, guys. Before departing this morning, the king hadn't taken any of the guards he suggested he bring on his journey, and refused to say where he was going, or to accept his offer of accompaniment. Not to mention the fact that a few of the royal hounds, thank you, dear, had gone missing, only to have their half-eaten remains found in the northern wings of the palace. That was horrisome. Who would do such a gruesome thing? "And what's wrong with headstrong girls," she pressed, "other than the fact that they're nothing but wooden-headed ninnies who can only open their mouths to give orders and gossip? I just prefer a certain type of woman." Thankfully, it was the right thing to say because she batted her eyelashes. "And what type of woman is that?" "Not an arrogant assassin," she pouted. "Suppose I wasn't an assassin, or a Big Mac. Would you fancy me then?" "No. Would you prefer Lady Caltane?" "Don't be a fool." Il me It was too easy to be mean, but it was also getting far too easy to be nice. He took a bite of bread. She watched him, her head angled. He sometimes felt that she looked at him the way a cat regards a mouse. He just wondered how long it would take her for her to pounce. She shrugged and took a bite from an apple. There was something girlish about her, too. Oh, he couldn't stand her contradictions. "You're staring, Captain." He almost apologized, but stopped. She was a haughty, vulgar, utterly impertinent assassin. He wished for the months to fly by, for her to be appointed champion, and then, once her years of servitude were over, to be gone. He hadn't slept well since they'd taken her out of Endovier. "You have food in your teeth," he said. She picked it out with a sharp nail and turned her head to the window. The rain slid down to the glass. Was she looking at the rain or something beyond? She sipped. He sipped from his goblet. Despite her arrogance, she was clever, and relatively kind, and somewhat charming. But where was that writhing darkness? Why didn't it show itself so he could just throw her into the dungeon and call off this ridiculous competition? There was something great and deadly concealed within her, and he didn't like it. He'd be ready when the time came. He'd be waiting. He just wondered which one of them would survive. Oh my, oh my, oh my. That was it, guys, for today. I feel a great love story coming up between Captain Westfall and the assassin. What do you guys think? Yeah, the prince and yeah, the other competitor. We will see. We will see. Yeah, maybe. Maybe, maybe.